Superclusters is where we demystify the secrets, stories, and tactics behind the money that moves the venture capital world. Welcome back, Superclusters fans, and today we have a really special episode. And each of our guests today need no introduction, having each been crowd favorites across the Superclusters seasons. And in many ways, this is the college reunion of Superclusters. So today we have Cawley, Ben Choi, and Jaclyn Freeman Hester. And if you're curious on each of their backstories before they found their way into the world of capital allocation, I would highly recommend tuning into Lisa's episode, Season 3, Episode 5, Ben's episode, Season 1, Episode 6, and Jaclyn's episode, Season 2, Episode 9, which we'll all include in the show notes below. But to give a really short introduction of each, Cawley is the Managing Director of Screendoor, an LP of GPs. Ben Choi is the Managing Director of Next Legacy Partners, a fund of funds dedicated to harnessing the power of venture capital for positive change. And then we have Jaclyn Freeman Hester, who is a partner at Foundry Group, which invests in both founders and fund managers across North America. So, the elephant in the room, what are we talking about? We are talking about firm building and succession planning. So at what point does a fund become a firm? And what does it mean to actually build a generational firm? What are the intangibles? What are the questions each of them ask to best understand if a GP is thinking long-term? And how do the best firms transition leadership to the next generation of partners? So once a firm has achieved success, how do the best firms transition from the leadership to the new partners over the next couple decades?
Well, and I think too, when you go back to the point around operational consistency, how do you achieve that? It's having frameworks and principles that you operate off of, but it's also knowing when to break those frameworks and principles and doing so in a very thoughtful way. I always tell people to document it too, so that you have a record of that thinking, that you're not lost in the kind of the chaos of the day-to-day, week-to-week nature that venture feels like it moves so fast, yet it's one of the asset classes that is the longest duration of anything in your multi-asset class portfolio. So you have to have your frameworks that guide your thinking and show that you're disciplined, but it's really strategic when you show why you've chosen to step outside those bounds. And I think in many cases, if you look back at really great successes for lots of well-known firms, they probably adjusted on some of those frameworks. Like there was probably something not straight down the fairway. And that's how they started to build that brand.
Interesting. And I'm curious for you, is that when you tell fund managers to document when they deviate, is that something you expect them to eventually put in the data room? Or is that something just for personal record keeping?
Well, I think this goes back to internal, what happens in the room, what the team's doing, culture, what the sense of learning is there. I think of that more as an internal tool that helps continue to build your decision making, again, building back the team and how they think about moving forward. I don't think of everything as like an immediate fundraising tool, because at the end of the day, it's about making the best portfolio decisions. Yeah. But this goes back to my audit days, where I can't believe I'm saying this, but if it's not documented, it's not done. And so I think of documenting it as a way, again, I'm not talking about like a PhD dissertation, but, putting a flag in the ground and saying, hey, this is how we're thinking about this today. I don't want my mental model to just morph over time and forget that it was in these words that I was thinking about this. Or even when you do a postmortem, right, on a company or a situation, like it's really important to just set that in stone so that you don't introduce bias when you look back on how you remember that. Because I think there's, you can look back on something that was really painful and you're trying to avoid some of the maybe mistakes that you'd inevitably make, or you can look back on something that went really well and you're maybe giving yourself more credit than you actually do. So if you can put a stake in the ground and just say, this is how we're thinking about this today, putting it away so that we can revisit it. Of course, you might have, in a fundraising context, somebody asking for that. But I think of that first and foremost as an internal tool that is extremely valuable, both for you as an investor in an individual capacity, but when you think about the path of your firm and the type of culture that you want there.
It's probably also extremely valuable to junior team members, because you can capture the inflection points of your thinking across time. And so in a way, they can kind of, as best as they can, see these moments encased in amber. And so you can continue to learn from that, and it becomes a record-keeping tool of that's even like 10, 20 years into the future, that people can revisit that documentation and be like, oh, that's how this decision was made. Is there anything that can instruct the way that I look at deals today?
Well, I think it's really important too, just in a leadership quality. Like, look, everybody has different leadership styles. For me, it's my style that I think people should see a level of vulnerability and see like the good decisions and the bad decisions and the reaction to those. I think it's less interesting and probably less beneficial for somebody in an apprenticeship role to see, somebody who just feels like bulletproof, because then you're setting misaligned expectations that they also can't make a mistake and reinforcing this, like, everything needs to be perfect. But again, another saying here, like, what is it? Perfect is the enemy of the good,
Yes.
or, progress more important than perfection. And so I always think about that progress element. And you can only do that if you show depth and growth.
Yeah. And this is one of our biggest questions, because we have this privilege of partnering with amazing firms who have a partnership that has generated so many returns particularly for us, for our philanthropic investors, where, we're making money to help make the world a better place. So we care a lot about, because we have such great access, we have this privilege of being partners with such great firms. One of the biggest questions for us is, do we need to step off of this ride at some point, or are they going to renew and reinvigorate the partnership for the next decade? And there isn't a moment where that happens. It's sort of a constant question for the established firms. Right? I think one of the things we look for is, ultimately, are they investing into the rest of the team? And there's so many different ways that happens, but is there a culture of cultivating talent? And ultimately, the idea of cultivating talent internally is kind of like investing in their startups. It's a high risk proposition. It's much higher risk hiring junior talent and promoting than investing in startups themselves, because you just need one startup to do great and that the performance works, but you move on from the companies that don't work out. You don't automatically move on from bad hires, or from hires that just don't they might not be bad, they don't make it all the way. So you have to have the discipline to step away from talent that either is not great at investing, or is a bad fit for culture, and that's really hard. And that a lot of firms don't have the willingness to let go of rock stars who are not a fit for their culture. There's nobody bad for culture, but not fit for the culture that you're trying to build, right? And then ultimately, are they doing the things that and it's art to cultivate that, but are they putting their younger partners in increasing roles of leadership within the firm? Is there? And I've seen a couple of things over the past few years where firms have been very thoughtful about, especially for established firms, the GP commitment is non-trivial, and nobody should shed a tear for venture capitalists and their economics. But if you are a young GP partner growing through the ranks, as you have the opportunity to get carry, you also have the responsibility to invest into your fund through a GP commitment. And at a larger firm that is successful, that may be a larger number. It's a trivial thing to the established partners.
Yeah.
But for the junior talent, it might be a large portion of their income. It might be a large portion of their savings. So there are firms, I think, who have been very thoughtful about lending to help with GP commit, or partnerships with banks to help with loans. But just thinking through, recognizing that the personal economics are different, and being thoughtful about that. I think is one thing that I've seen some firms do, and that's a great way to hold on to your junior talent that you want to and help them get through. One other thing, like during COVID, a lot of the younger partners, even if they're equal partners and full MDs in a firm, a lot of us had young kids, right? And we were homeschooling and doing everything at home, and also trying to run our firms. And I think there's a wide range of partnerships and empathy within partnerships for every situation. But in the moment, right, if you're a senior partner and your kids are out of the house, you just do your thing and everybody has to just suck it up and do the work. But if you care about investing in your partnership, you recognize that you're all different stages. And certainly the senior partners really want that midlife GP who has children at home still, but is leading the firm in so many important ways. You probably want to as a senior partner, maybe you pick up more slack. And so I saw some partnerships where they just had the honest conversation. I can't come over and babysit your kids, but I can recognize that, your time's going to be a little harder right now. And we don't know how long it's going to be, but we might have to think about rebalancing our work and responsibilities. So that's another way I think just how you can invest into partnership, be thoughtful about everybody's life situation.
I completely agree. And I'm curious, and I'll plead ignorance here, but you talked about lending. And I have heard of firms who've, because it's a rather large capital commitment for someone more junior in their career, that it is a large, meaningful percentage of their overall net worth, not just their investment portfolio, but their net worth. How does, in practice, how does it look tactically when it comes to lending? Like, what are the typical, and if there are any typical, like terms that a senior partner or like a firm would offer for a junior partner in terms of lending that amount of money to get to the GP commit?
There are programs from the banks. I actually don't know. I haven't checked in the last year, so they may be harder now post SVB and FRB stuff. But there are capital GP commit lending programs that they just have your carry as collateral and super low interest. So that's one way of doing it. I think there are plenty of firms that do it on a lending is probably not the right word. It's a deferred pay-in, like a cashless program where you're actually not lending. You're just deferring and allowing them to pay it in as distributions come back.
Gotcha.
And the partnership just sort of absorbs that as opposed to tracking interest or something like that.
Gotcha. So I assume like, say distributions come in at like year 5, year 6, like early distributions, like what you would have gotten as your carry would just effectively be like the GP commit back to the firm.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting. Well,
there's one other thought on investing into junior talent that even before kind of if you often have senior partners, kind of midlife partners who are leading the firm, and then you have junior partners or junior investors who are your bench, right? Who are cultivating. And 20 years ago, I was involved in something called the Kauffman Fellows program, the Society of Kauffman Fellows, and it's sort of like a YPO for VCs. And for me, that was a really important seminal part of my kind of early career. And it actually today still, the relationships that I built at that time and over the decades through the network have been really important to me as peers that I can sort of have honest and trusted conversations with. And, I think it's more common now. They're pretty, at the time, maybe they're still sort of early in as an organization where I was so grateful to my firm where they're happy to invest, and it costs money for the firm to pay for the program. And they invested into me. And I was at Storm Ventures, and the partners of Storm were gracious and said, this benefits you, but by benefiting you, it benefits us. We're going to have a better investor, have a better chance of an investor that goes a distance with us. So that was true for me. And I think it's not as hard of an argument to make today, but there are plenty of firms that see Kauffman Fellows as a way to invest into, sort of give a specialized YPO or business school like experience for young investors to increase the odds of success.
Interesting. I know over the years, at least as I've been looking at each class, there have also been a larger proportion of LPs who go through the program.
Yeah.
And the mentorship for a lot of junior LPs hoping to be senior one day is also phenomenal. So it's expanded a little bit, although still pretty adjacent to the initial impetus.
Yeah, my partner, Kelly Cullinan, was one of the first LPs that went through the program.
There we go.
7 or 8 years ago. And I have, two more partners, there are 4 Kauffman Fellows in my program. So 2 more partners have gone through the program since as well. So we're a big believer in LPs also being with the program. It adds value to the program, but there's so much to learn, particularly that question about oversimplifying as LPs. Like you spend time, like really like nights and weekends with peers in your class, and you get to see more of the sausage making. And I think there's so much value to an LP to get that view.
So this is a soft promotion. Not that Kauffman Fellows is sponsoring this or anything, but
maybe they should.
Maybe they should. Maybe let's go reach out to them. It's like, hey, you know what? Like we've mentioned you quite a few times. In fact, I want to say our listeners can keep us honest, but I want to say like 30-40% of our guests so far have been Kauffman Fellows.
Oh, there you go. That says a lot.
So it goes, and like, keep in mind, I only interview LPs, right? So that's
says a lot.
Quite an audience.
You probably should hold this section and then ask them for sponsorship and then decide whether or not, otherwise they're getting free sponsorship. No, Kauffman Fellows is awesome. They're great. And I do think in this topic of succession planning and investing into your firm building, it is not something that benefits directly to, I think it does actually help an investor be a better investor, but I think even more importantly, it helps a firm be a better firm by investing into your talent.
Right. And even if you don't end up hiring that junior talent in the long term, you do get to make friends with someone who will go on to do very, very well. And it goes a long way. Like even if they start their own firm, if they're at another firm, they're passing deals to you. They're talking about what they're seeing, and it actually helps the rising tide raises all boats kind of thing.
Well, I think that topic, that idea, I think that's true and a great framework for thinking about succession and investing in talent. It's certainly how I think about it for our firm, where ultimately we want to invest into our own team in such a way that success looks like they're constantly being recruited by other firms, and they're constantly being recruited by our own investors to start their own firm, right? Because ultimately that is someone that we really want here, right? And so that's the same thing for any venture firm. Some venture firms that I think don't think about succession, the rock star senior GP who has all the carry is like, go do good investments and you earn your way into it. I earn my way and that's it. And you sort of kind of keep everybody down. But the other version is, if somebody is so good that they could leave and raise their own fund, that's exactly who you want in your partnership. Yeah. You want to be a partnership of equals that decide to get together and not just are so grateful to have a chance to be here, but they're not that great.
It's almost the idea, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm putting words in your mouth, but it's the idea of creating, like, for example, the next legacy mafia.
Yeah.
And in many ways, either they stay at the firm or they start their own thing. It's like your reach is wide and you build friends with each other and you continue to work with each other, which is why like the PayPal Mafia works so great or the Fairchild Semiconductor one works so well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, but I want everybody to stay at Next Legacy. So
that's the goal. But
the difference is that startups. Actually, the difference is that PayPal gets bought. Fairchild Semiconductor. Well, they break up. Yeah. Partnerships, actually, in this topic of firm succession, firm building, how do you make a firm last? I think venture firms and firms like ours that are partnerships, they can last. The outcome for us is not to get acquired. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not. And if your outcome is to get acquired, which is or go public, that's what startups are. Then you get mafia, because then there's a moment in time, an inflection point where there's a natural spreading of the talent, right? It goes out to does new things. We hope at Next Legacy that our team has infinite runway to develop their potential within the firm, and I fundamentally believe that's possible.
I mean, I've seen it a little bit, and I would say like from my LP perspective is really small seed funds, a handful of established ones, but a lot of emerging ones. So, we're not LPs in the likes of Sequoia and Benchmark and firms like that. Although from the outside, I would say that I think that those two would be among those that are best in class in it being about the name versus just the individual people. So I from the LP perspective, I think things that are important is that you make it clear to the LPs who you believe or who you are grooming to take the firm over, and that you give those people access to the LPs so that they start to build their own relationships with them, that you get comfortable with that, and that you highlight them both in the annual meetings, like who's presenting matters, who's clearly running the show matters, and that that you do a nice job of leveraging the brand power that you have to help empower that next generation. And so that sometimes that might be stepping back a little bit from how much you're writing and how much you're at the front and center, and getting a speaking engagement saying, I can't do it, but my partner can. Right. And so giving those opportunities to highlight those next people, and making sure also that like the voice and the feel of the firm starts to become about them. And so they should have input in the high level, how do we do things? And you have to create a space where they can be heard and where you're flexible. And so I think a lot of it is like, it's really hard to not have sacred cows. Venture is full of incredibly smart, you have to be highly opinionated. You have to have conviction in your opinions. It's better when you're flexible about those things, but it's hard. And a lot of people start their firm because they don't like what they've seen in the market. And so these are our principles and we believe in these principles. And so creating an environment where, there's flexibility on those things and people feel comfortable challenging them based on what they're seeing are shifts in the market and what the market needs and what we can provide and what the best founders, are looking for. And so I think a lot of it is about being inclusive to that next generation, setting clear expectations and making sure that the LPs are just getting the vibe that like, hey, these are the people and they're going to be driving and we're going to make sure that you have plenty of interaction with them. We're going to make sure the market knows that they're the ones driving. There's that piece, but that's a continuation of it being about individual people.
Yeah.
I think the other piece is that the brand has to stand for something. And I'll go back to Sequoia. I think they've, you get a term sheet from Sequoia. That's a big deal for a founder and it means something. And it means that you're part of this thing that has incredible credibility in the market, a lot of capital behind it. And so I do think that some firms have been able to do it well.
To give an example, I don't know if they have all the cards there necessarily. They're still younger in comparison to like the Sequoia, the benchmarks and all that. But one that we both intimately admire, Hustle Fund. One thing that in my experience that I've seen like Eric not only tell me about, but also they're like, even on public personas and in social media, Brian Nichols runs their Angels Squad kind of group, right? And there are many times he's publicly said like, hey, Eric's like, hey, I am Brian's intern for the next month. Like I am just learning from Brian. There's a lot of like raising their team up. And many cases when I've asked like, I know Eric a little bit better on the Hustle Fund team, but like I've asked Eric like, hey, would you be open to speaking on stage about this and that and that? And he's like, hey, actually, there's a person I think is going to be the next generation partner at Hustle Fund. You should have this person instead. And even from a non-LP in Hustle Fund perspective, I constantly find like both Elizabeth, Eric, and just like constantly raising up their team members as well.
Yeah, I think that's the type of behavior that I'm talking about. It can be hard to do. I mean, and for them, especially as emerging managers, right? Because they're still sort of putting the stake in the ground for themselves.
Yeah.
And so, I admire the forethought around that. I think that, the other piece that I didn't say before is what I'm hearing and feeling a lot of right now is there are people at larger firms who are wanting to go spin out and do their own thing. And I think we're going to see that over the next couple of years. You and I talked about this last time. Like, I think it's going to be an awesome time to be investing in emerging managers. And it's not necessarily because those larger firms don't do a good job of succession planning. I think there's lots of dynamics that go into it that we could maybe talk about probably offline in a different conversation. But one thing one thing I feel really fortunate about that I'm recognizing that I think other firms don't do as much of is like I did our last fundraise with a subset of my partners, and I was at the forefront of it. I helped run it. I was at every meeting. I was on planes. I was trying to bring in my own LPs, all of that. And that is like really invaluable experience if you're going to go out on your own. And one of the, possible disservices that's been done to really strong investors that are then being tapped to be the next generation of some of these larger firms is they are not involved in fundraising and investor relations. And in some ways it's like, great, I don't have to do this thing that's pretty hard and takes a lot of time and takes time away from me doing deals. At the same time, they then don't have the relationships and knowledge for when they want to spin out and do their own thing. Yeah. Perhaps there's intention behind that, right? Is you want to keep people. But I will say that that's a really important piece of it too. And that needs to happen early enough so that by the time the fundraisers responsibilities are really handed over to that next generation, that they actually know how to do it. They know the drill. The LPs are expecting it to be them. And that they actually, are set up to succeed in doing that. Like all of the things matter.
I won't name any names, but I was recently in some conversations with folks at 9-10 figure funds, GPs at 9-10 figure funds, and a lot of them, well, not a lot of them, two of them had not chatted with a single LP in their life before.
Yeah.
And so it's a different dynamic because they technically are a GP of a very established institution, and you'd expect that there'd be some element of succession planning and firm building because it is a rather established institution, but they haven't.
I have heard of at least one firm, and there's possibly others that fall in this camp, where a lot of the noise in succession is because there is a lack of transparency around the economics of the firm. And that includes, and the governance of the firm. And so that includes management company, how cash comes in and out, how people are paid, all of that, the governance of how decisions actually get made in the different entities. And it's kind of convoluted because you've got a management company that runs the firm. In some cases, there's multiple management companies for a given firm. And then there's each fund entity, which is different. And I'm not sure that all non-founder GPs actually get enough exposure to understand all of these things. Mm-hmm. So it's not to say that everyone's just going to be super transparent and upfront about it and share everything with everybody. But I do think that providing some clarity around how all those things work. What does it mean to be a partner? What does it mean to be a GP? What does it mean to be in the management company? Why do those things matter? What do you have to do to get into those things? I think that being transparent and upfront and and communicative around those things with the folks that you are grooming to take over can be really helpful in aligning everybody around expectations, and builds trust because they feel like while they might be annoyed that they don't make as much money as you, they at least feel like they're being told the truth.
Yeah.
And they at least know where they could get to, right? In some ways it's enticing, like, wow, these people are making a lot of money. I want to stick around here because I want to make that kind of money. So I think that it's not just about your carry and your salary. There's like all these other things that matter, and trying to get people enough transparency that they feel like they can trust how the organization works can really help. The other thing that I've seen that I think is really interesting, and I will say I think law firms some of them are somewhat good at this, is there's some frameworks and sort of rules to the game, which includes there is an age at which you start to retire. And I think it's pretty interesting, and maybe it shouldn't be an age thing. And maybe hard and fast rules are hard for little shops to kind of adopt, but it kind of sets expectations so that people know, like, hey, if I'm going to stick around, I'm not going to have this overhang of a bunch of people who aren't working as much as I am and haven't done a deal in a long time, continuing to take a lot of the economics, because that's the calculus that people are often making when they decide, like, hey, I'm just going to go start my own thing. There's also a lot of, like, I think we've gotten too big. I don't want to deal with this. I want to do a different stage. I just want to build my own thing, whatever it is. There's lots of other reasons. But from an economic perspective, like understanding those things, when you bring people in, especially when you bring people in as partners, being generous around compensating them from funds that they did not build can help create alignment, because they're not sitting there while the rest of you are getting rich off of something, that started 5 years ago and exits in 10 years. And so they're kind of on an island because everybody else is just sort of in a different economic position. And that can be very isolating. So there's things like that I've seen some firms be intentional about that I think is really smart. And yes, like, you want everybody to earn their keep, but I think sometimes the farther in it you are, you have this idea of like how you had to earn every dollar, and so they should too. And while there might be some element of fairness in that way of thinking, you also have to think about, like, what's the best way to generate returns, get everybody aligned, get everybody working on the right things, get everybody doing their best work so that we can have the best outcomes. And to also be sort of incorporating those things. And the thing I was going to say about the firm that does the sort of like pushing on stepping down is they also have clarity, like, in the first fund, I'm just making this up, but it's similar to what they do. In the first fund where you are not going to be full-time, you get 75% of your economics or 50% of your economics. In the next fund, you get 10%. And then in the next fund, there's some long tail franchise fee that you get 1% forever because you helped to start the thing. Yeah. And so you're aligned and you're still helping, right? And having things like that can help a ton, because for the next generation people, they at least know what they're working with. Maybe that gets negotiated. And then so it's not just about transitioning the thing over to a new set of leadership, but also figuring out how do you make room for that group to then bring in new people and sort of let the other people transition out, both economically and internally with all of those dynamics, but then also, again, on the sort of market facing side and getting those narratives right and those transitions right. So like I said, it's really hard. And, I think that in some cases, some people decide that it's not worth it. And I think that's a totally valid conclusion to come to. For me, the most important thing is you got to be having fun and you've got to love doing it, because that, I think, helps drive great returns. And we're humans and we should, it's a privilege, but like getting to do work that you love doing, is kind of what it's all about. So I'll get off my soapbox.
What are the highlights and lowlights of having permanence at a firm? And what does it mean to plan really for the long term?
Well, I think when you think about succession planning, you actually have to take a step back and think like, is that even going to be my approach? Like, do I even need to think about succession planning, or am I really talking about wind down planning and like when I stop raising a subsequent fund? Because I think I hear people that will like refer to, and we use this phrasing, right? Like an enduring firm, but an enduring firm doesn't mean that it needs to exist in perpetuity. Like enduring firm, can be synonymous with like a large multi-stage brand. That's one type of enduring firm. There will be firms that have multiple fund cycles of success, but then can decide I'm not going to raise another fund and this won't live beyond me. I think that's a very thoughtful approach in how somebody continues to invest. And I think that informs how they build those prior funds, right? How they interact with founders, the type of folks that they also bring in as other employees around the table. It's an indicator of what types of growth there is for somebody in those firms. So said differently, if you have a firm where it's not going to live beyond, that single decision maker or partnership, however big it may be, and you're, a more junior professional that wants to go and work with those folks, that's going to be an amazing experience. But off the bat, clearly what type of growth you're going to get. You're going to get apprenticeship experience to hopefully set you up for something else. It won't be that growth path within that firm to be an equal partner. And that's okay. That's not good, bad. It's just an option. And then I think that there are firms that when they think about succession, I'm going to grow my AUM. I'm going to grow my fund size. I'm going to add to my team. I'm going to add products. And that's also compelling too, as long as there's a market reason for that.
So I think that, and when I say permanence, I don't know that people actually mean like forever and ever and ever. But I think the idea is that the firm is a thing that you're going to build and you want that firm to continue on sort of indefinitely. And the challenge, I think this is my opinion and my perspective and my experience are specific to early stage and generally like smaller, more boutique shops, call it. So I think that the challenges are that everything's a trade-off, and that because a lot of the economics in venture are earned over a long arc with a ton of volatility and uncertainty, where your carry is not real until it's real and may never come to fruition, that you have this limiting factor of management fees around how you can even structure a firm as far as, just having the resources to have the team that you want to have. In addition to that, my experience in professional life has only been at law firms and venture firms, which are somewhat definitionally decision by committee. And I don't think decision by committee is the best way to make decisions. There's a reason that companies don't do it that way. And so I think like that sort of informs my opinion around like the reason it gets hard is that you need more resources over time. It's different than call it like a buyout shop or more PE focused shops where your turnaround time for a given deal for the management of a given deal once you're in is a lot shorter. And so the portfolio just really builds on itself. And if you're the type of investor that I want to be, and that we are, I think, at Foundry, is like, once you're in, and you're in for a really long time, and you're in a way where it's not a phone call once a month. It's a lot more work than that. And it just adds up. And so if you think of, and the amount of diversification necessary for early stage is on the order of 20 to 40 companies in a fund. Some people want to be more concentrated, less concentrated, but that adds up and it stacks. And if you don't grow the team, you can't keep up with the work in a way where you're doing a good job of that and you're doing a good job of finding and investing in new deals. So then you have to grow the team. Well, when you grow the team, there's several ways to grow a team. You can get more support, but then you're also managing people. So that's a time consideration. You're adding people who want to understand rightfully, what is my path? When do I get promoted? When do I get to be a partner? I see, like that's the thing I'm after. And so you're constantly dealing with managing those expectations and having those conversations and trying to identify, how people are doing, whether you should promote them up. And then you're sharing more of the pie. The pie does grow over time, so there is more to share, but that's a thing. And then the other way to do it is to grow, only at the senior level or only at the partner level, which is people that you don't have to manage as much, but again, more pie sharing. But even more so, there are more conversations with each new person that you add into a partnership. There's like an exponential number of conversations that, right. And so, it's not linear, and, it's also the decision-making at the firm, which is generally flat. And especially if you start out where, hey, we're small and everyone's equal and we all do everything together, that's really hard to do as it grows and grows. And so having 3 people make decisions together and have constant conversations with each other and know what's going on in the portfolio and knowing what's going on across the business is actually very different than 6 people, and certainly very different than 10 people. And so I think that's the challenge is the work compounds and you have to address that. But then the human components and the partnership components and those challenges also compound as you grow. And so I would say it's just hard. It doesn't mean it's so hard that it can't be done. I think that it's so hard that you can only do it. And by do it, I mean scale and add people and think about succession. In my opinion, if you're incredibly intentional about it, and if you have a core team of founders who are aligned and who trust each other and have strong enough communication practices that you can revisit that conversation as the firm evolves, as people evolve, as relationships evolve, and that you can continue to be aligned and intentional around it as you go, versus on day one, this is what we're going to do. And then things change and we never talk about it and things just sort of start to happen. And so those are things I think it's hard. And I think it's really hard if you're not setting things up along the way to have a structure that could transition to a next generation and have clarity both at the founding level and for the new people of how that's all going to work. I think it's really easy to punt on that stuff until you need it. Right. And it's really hard to do in a short-term period of time. And I think from an LP perspective, in a way, as you transition to new generations, depending on how you've done it, whether you've grown people up or whether you've brought people in, they do have to do a new underwriting. And so in some ways they're always considering re-upping versus adding a new name. But that consideration, I would say, it's more considered the more change there is. And so to the extent that it feels like real change, then there's the LP side of it too, which is, well, we now have to get to know this team and underwrite them. And so in order to do that well and smoothly, they have to have time with those people. They have to get to know them. So there's all of that. And then I think the final piece that I didn't mention of why it's hard is that because of the way early stage venture works, it's really about individual people. It's kind of, for most firms, not all. It's like a golf team of sorts. right?
Yeah.
Or like an Olympic team of runners, right? Like you love rooting for USA, but at the end of the day, like there is a star runner that's the best and is winning, and people win medals that are, gold and silver and bronze, and they're individual races, right? And so I think a lot of times, founders do feel like they're working with a firm, but a single person from that firm is on their board. A single person from that firm led their deal. A single person from that firm is the person they interact with the most, even if they interact with everybody. And so I think it's pretty challenging to make, and some have done it incredibly well. But I would say, especially for early stage venture, where it's very much about the people and the individual and the individual's brands, it's really hard to make the firm's brand about the firm and not the individual people. And so often I think what happens a little too late is when you're trying to do the transition, no matter what you do, everyone thinks about the founders for that firm. And even if you're semi-retired, and even if you're taking a step back, and even if all the other people are the ones leading deals, it's still that person's firm. And it's really, really hard, both internally and externally, to change those sort of like deeply held beliefs. Again, I don't think it's something that can't be done. I think if it is going to be done, it has to be done with a lot of intention, and it can't be an afterthought. And I think where it's an afterthought, it's not really worth it.
Thank you, all three of you, for sharing your thoughts here. I've been taking copious notes myself, and I know this is going to be an episode I revisit a lot. So, not to be cognizant of time, thank you so much, and we'll see you all soon. I want to give a special shout out to today's sponsor, Alchemist Accelerator. Backed by the likes of Coastal Ventures, Mayfield, Salesforce, just to name a few, Alchemist is the top B2B startup accelerator that's been around since 2012, backing founders from day one. And if you've been around for 12 years and running laser focused only on one industry, you build this incredible set of flywheels, and positive feedback loop is absolutely insane. We back the best enterprise talent who go on to change the world in which we live in, who then come back to their hometown, coach, and mentor the next generation of world-class enterprise talent. And don't take it just from me. Alchemist has backed the likes of LaunchDarkly, Rigetti, Privacera, MoEngage, FarmWise, just to name a few, many of which who have come back as mentors and coaches for the current classes of Alchemist. If you're curious and want to get more involved in the Alchemist ecosystem, check out alchemistaccelerator.com/superclusters. That's an S at the beginning and S at the end, and we'll include the link in the show notes below. Till next, stay awesome. Hey Superclusters fans, David from Post here, and if you're tuning in from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts find your ear, it'd mean the world to me if you left a review. For those from the YouTube universe, let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and it'd mean a lot to me if you could share this episode with just one other person who'd get a kick out of today's topics. I'm on the road to publishing to at least 100 episodes of Superclusters, so every comment, question, review helps me make this experience more helpful, exciting, and fun for you. And lastly, I want to share a quick disclaimer. The views expressed in this episode are for informational purposes only and are solely the views of myself and the guest alone. They are not representative of Alchemist Accelerator. None of the views expressed herein constitute legal, investment, business, or tax advice. Any allusions or references to funds or companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment recommendations. Consult a professional investment advisor prior to making any investment decisions. And that's all from me. See you on the next.